Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about what I think is some of the easiest place to turn our attention when it comes to healing and transforming and working on ourselves with psychedelics, particularly early on in that first maybe 50 journeys we experience. This is a topic that is under-discussed, in my opinion, and is highly relevant to all of us, and that's the topic of conditioning. If you're a human being, you've been conditioned. Period. End of story. I don't care who you are. I don't care what background you come from. I don't care how free of a mind you have or think you have. You have gone through some process of conditioning if you're even remotely socialized. And quite frankly, if you're a human being. If you're not a human being, what are you doing watching this channel in the first place, right? So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk a bit about how conditioning and psychedelics intersect and what we can do with that information. Okay, and just really quick, in case you've never seen any of my videos, you don't know me, you don't know why I would be talking about any of this stuff, let me introduce myself briefly to you. My name is Dave. I'm a coach. I'm a hypnotherapist. I work in the psychedelic space with people around prep, integration, transformational coaching around sessions, this kind of a thing. This is my passion. It's what I love to do. I'm always talking on this channel about healing and transformation and personal development and psychedelics and spiritual awakening and how all these things kind of go together. So if you like that kind of content, you're absolutely welcome to be here. You're in the right place. And if you have any questions, leave them in the box down below or feel free to shoot me an email. Enough said. Let's go ahead and get in the topic here. Okay, so conditioning. So this is, in my opinion, kind of some of the low-hanging fruit that you can start to work with early on if you're new to psychedelics and start to get some really profound breakthroughs in yourself. This is also a topic I think that is just generally incredibly important to understand if you want to understand a lot of the quirks and the aspects of being human beings and how we end up with issues in the first place and why different people are so different and how come something is so hard to let go of. There's a lot around conditioning for us to understand that I think is just generally pretty absent from the conversation, but highly relevant to the work that we're talking about doing here in terms of personal growth and personal transformation and resolving issues and leveling up and feeling better. This is a huge, huge, huge topic and place to look. So I'm going to do my best here to try to summarize some of my thoughts, but this won't be the be all end all. And this is really just a part one of what will probably be, a few videos on this topic. But I want to kind of start to get it down for you guys and start to get you thinking about considering your own experience through this lens of conditioning. Okay. So, let me see. So first things first, let me go ahead and define what I mean by conditioning, what it is, and then we'll talk a little bit about how it happens. Then we'll talk a little bit about working with your conditioning in the context of psychedelics, and we'll kind of wrap it there because I feel like that's kind of a good intro, which is really what this video is intended to be. So first things first, what do I mean by conditioning? So our nervous system has an amazing capacity, and it's not just our nervous system. You see this in other animals, obviously, too, of learning how to automatically learn. So if we do something enough times or we have a strong enough experience, we automatically learn at a nervous system. And then something goes from being unknown or something we have to try to learn to being habituated into our nervous system as an automatic response. So conditioning is the process of putting in and teaching the nervous system how to automatically respond or do something. So when you think about all the things you know how to do without trying, right? Whether that's walking, swallowing water, when you're drinking from a glass of water, whether that's driving, whether that's riding a bicycle, whether that's whatever, all the things you do, using your phone, think of all the things you do habitually and automatically. Those have all been conditioned into you. That's the only way that it's possible for you to automatically do it without thinking. Another way of describing this kind of deep level of conditioning is what we would call procedural memory. In other words, procedures that your body or your nervous system knows how to do without having to think about it. And there are different types of conditioning, which I don't necessarily need to get into. And the study of conditioning was actually an earlier form of psychology called behavioralism or behaviorism, not sure which. So you may be familiar with, Skinner, B.F. Skinner. You may be familiar with, obviously, Pavlov's dogs and the whole experiment of ringing the bell and giving them the food, ringing the bell, giving them the food, ringing the bell, giving them the food, then ringing the bell, and they salivate, right? So this is conditioning, right? Just in the abstract. What's really relevant for you guys to know, though, is how this gets applied in terms of our growing up and being socialized, right? So we grow up and we are conditioned by our environment around us over and over and over in thousands of different ways. So we're conditioned by our own direct lived experiences and learnings. We are conditioned by what our parents and our caregivers and our family members embody around us, our family's culture. We are conditioned by our cultural values and what our culture believes in and does around us. We are conditioned by our peers and by what's acceptable or not acceptable according to those we go to school with and relate to on a day-to-day basis. We are conditioned by law. We are conditioned, obviously, by media, by social media now these days, right? So we have all these different, forms of conditioning that shape implicit learning, in other words, rules and things we need to do to successfully navigate life, right? So this is what's called social conditioning, broadly speaking, in general, right? So it's all the implicit rules, ways to be, ideas, concepts, philosophies, approaches to life that have kind of been inculcated. In other words, kind of really just kind of absorbed into us through osmosis usually, but sometimes taught to us overtly too, through growing up, right? And this is what I want to be talking about with you guys here. And hopefully you're starting to already get why this might be important on a psychedelic experience, but we'll unpack it a bit more. Now, here's the thing that happens. Generally speaking, as we go through life, if you aren't really working with non-ordinary states of consciousness, you're just kind of working in your default mode, typical, standard, everyday working consciousness, and you're just going about life doing you, just being you, right? Generally speaking, your average person will not be that aware of their own conditioning. We will have all kinds of ideas and beliefs and patterns of behavior and, reactions and all this stuff that's conditioned in, that's automatic. And we are running on autopilot all throughout our day, not really thinking that much about the ideas that we're operating on in this autopilot state. We just kind of run them. We don't think about it. This is, what in hypnosis we would call a trance, really, but this is kind of how we work. We automate all the things that we do all the time so that we don't really have to think too deeply about it, because it burns more calories in our brain the more we have to actively think, right? So we're just kind of going about life with all of this stuff that's been programmed in there through film and TV and friendships and our culture, yada, yada, right? And we're just kind of running on it. Now, lo and behold, you take a psychedelic, and one of the first things that most people notice early on, it might even be in your first psychedelic experience ever, is we get a bit of distance, because we kind of get that little bit of softening of the ego structure and the automatic identity structure and our default mode of being. We get a little space from it. And in that space from our default way of being, all of a sudden we start to see our conditioning for the first time. A lot of times this happens. All of a sudden we realize all the ideas and beliefs and assumptions and, cultural values and, ways that our family worked and, ways that we've run our life, the assumptions that we've run our life on, the emotions that we've run our life on, all the things we've been conditioned and have been patterned into us. All of a sudden, for the first time for a lot of us, we start to notice. And we have enough space, if we can notice it, to really evaluate and go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, wow. There's that belief, and there's that belief, and there's that habit pattern I have, and there's that emotion pattern I have, and there's this thing that my family taught me, and there's all this stuff there that we start to tune into that we didn't realize was even there. And I think that this is a pretty intuitive process for a lot of us. This is a very obvious first place to look as you're on a psychedelic experience and you have this separation between ego and your awareness, where you can start to really become self-aware of your own conditioning. And that's historically speaking, a pretty unusual position for most human beings to be in. So there are things we can do with that. So let's talk a bit about that. So as I was saying, as we start to become aware of our conditioning, all of a sudden this gives us a new opportunity that we've never had before, which is the opportunity to evaluate our conditioning and reflect on what pieces of our conditioning we like, what pieces of our conditioning we don't like, what pieces of our conditioning we just flat out disagree with or don't share the same perspective or opinion or values on. And we can start to go through a process of reconciliation where we choose to actually own the aspects of our character and our conditioning that we still align with. And we can start to release, let go of, or rehabituate ourselves or break the habit or unwire the conditioning that we no longer align with, right? So whether this is along the lines of things you've learned, growing up as a kid, things you learned from your family, things you learned as cultural values, things you learned online, right? Ideas that you encountered, you'll notice, you're like, oh, that idea, I think that's kind of nonsense. I don't agree with that. And you start to sort what it is you agree with, disagree with, what you value, what's important to you, what you don't align with your culture on, what you do align with your culture on, and you start to take ownership and become authentic, become the author of your own conditioning, right? To really start to take up the mantle, if you will, of really owning yourself. And this is the thing, before we are self-aware of our own conditioning and before we, make choices about that, we really, quite frankly, we aren't in ownership of ourselves. We are running programming that we never chose. It was programmed into us for the most part, either by happenstance or, intentionally by someone else. So one of the first things we can start to do with psychedelics is start to reflect on these different areas of our lives, these different sets of beliefs, these different sets of responses and habits we have, and our way of being. And instead of being defensive about it, we can start to be inquisitive about it and explore it and choose what we want to keep, what we agree with, what we want to let go of, and start to program ourselves. Start to own our own conditioning and condition ourselves to be the way we want to be. Now, what's deeper underneath conditioning that there is to look at and really get tuned into is sets of values. So what's a value? A value is something, let's call it an abstract thing that is generally deeply meaningful. Right? So a value would be something like kindness or love or compassion or the truth or, being good or, getting yours or, there are different sets of values in the world, right? And conditioning is usually built around values. It's there to install certain value systems into us, right? So, in Western culture, for example, there might be a value of, materialism. There might be a value of, scientific rationalism. There might be a value of truth and whatever the truth is. There might be a value of, hierarchy and above and belowness. There might be a value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are things that are just kind of inculcated through the social conditioning. Competition might be another one. And then you can go through and you can reflect, are these my values? Do I still align with these? And what you want to look for here are values that deeply move you, that are deeply important to you, that if you think about them enough, stir you up with emotion and make you feel like a profound connection to life, right? So when you're starting to find your value system because it will move you at a deep, deep level, right? And those are the things to live by. Though that's your script, that's your personal code of conduct, if you want to think of it that way, your value system. And your value system is something to be, I think, reflecting on over the course of your life and refining and retuning into and re-questioning and reevaluating and updating and upgrading over and over and over as you get more information by living more as a human being, right? Now, one of the important things to understand about values is that your values give you happiness. Your values give you fulfillment and meaning in life. If you're struggling with not having any meaning, if you're struggling with, not knowing what's important to you, that's generally, what tilts us towards feeling depressed and numb and dissociated and disconnected. And oftentimes, conversely, to put that another way, it's the wounding of something we value earlier in life that starts to create the freeze response, that creates the numbing, that creates depression or creates dissociation or emotional numbness or all this kind of stuff, right? And so part of what undoes depression, part of what undoes lacking in direction, part of what undoes all of this stuff is, first of all, healing any fear or hesitation we have towards valuing something, and then discovering what it is we value now and living in alignment with those values. So if you want to heal emotionally, if you want to really open your heart and feel filled up with passion and joy and motivation and a gusto for life, the secret is discovering what your values are and then organizing yourself, organizing your life around your value system. And not just doing this once, but doing this again, whenever you need to, checking in with yourself regularly. What are my values now? What's important to me, right? Values are what's important to you. And again, so you're programmed, you're conditioned to have an automatic set of responses based on an automatic value system that is culturally given to you. And I think the early work we can do with psychedelics that really makes a huge difference in getting us more connected to ourselves, more on the right track in our lives, starts with sifting through what conditioning we don't agree with, we don't like, we don't align with, we don't want to have be our personal guidance system in life. Really getting clear on that, getting clear on the values in that conditioning. Sometimes it's about my parents were well-intended, but I don't agree. Sometimes it's about our society is kind of off track on this and I think it's toxic. Sometimes it's about this is really deeply important to me. And now I see it and now I feel it. And the more I think about it, the more it moves me in the most beautiful way. And that's what I want to do more of in my life, right? And as you start to tune into that, you let go of the old conditioning, you start to recondition yourself to lean into what is deeply meaningful to you. And voila, you start to have a better life. So I hope this starts to make sense. This is how we can start to use psychedelics to, again, low-hanging fruit, start to work with and see this stuff. I will say as kind of a caveat before I go ahead and wrap the video here, I've talked to people, I've worked with people where, it was their first time taking psychedelics. They took them and what they saw was all the places they were inauthentic, where they didn't like themselves, where they didn't agree with themselves, where they had a bunch of self-criticism, where they had a bunch of, looking at themselves and going, God, is that really me? Is that really what I believe? And that can be part of this process, right? It's not uncommon to take a psychedelic and then, you start, the mask you get a little space, the mask comes off a little bit and you start to see the deeper you. You start to see all the places that you're kind of not in alignment with what you really feel or believe or what your personal truth is. And so sometimes that can be a little, upsetting, discomforting, challenging. It can really stir us up on occasion to have that realization. I would encourage you to continue to have the courage to just, let go of what needs letting go of, forgive yourself for all the conditioning you've been running on, which isn't really yours, and start to clarify what is really yours, because that's really where it starts to get good. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video for now because I've already talked a lot. I don't want to overdo this video, but there will be more that I'm going to talk about here with conditioning. So this is kind of conditioning as it applies personally to you. We're going to talk more about collective conditioning next video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.